Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody, and welcome to Cmx Masterclass. Today, we're going to be talking about finding your Northstar metric, and we have a really exciting and full session for you. So I'm going to be really quick. I'm going to do a short overview of the agenda and some ground rules, and then we'll get right into it. All right, so quick overview of the agenda. So we have the next hour together. The masterclass itself is going to be around 40 minutes. We'll jump into some live Q&A afterwards, and then we'll wrap up at 10 a.m. Pacific. So a few guidelines to help you make the most out of this event. So as you can see, the chat is pretty active already. Let's keep all the chat right here in the session tab. If you haven't had a chance to do so, please introduce yourself. We also have a Q&A tab that's just to the right of the session tab. If you have any questions throughout the masterclass, please pop them in there, and it will be easier for us to see, and hopefully we can get through as many of them as possible. In that Q&A tab, you can also upvote any questions that you want asked. Our most commonly asked question with these events is if the event is being recorded and will be sent out afterwards. And I can assure you that yes, it's being recorded. So please don't worry about scribbling down a ton of notes. Really, I would encourage you to try to be present today. Close any distracting applications. I know how tempting it might be to kind of be in your Slack and email and try to multitask. But really, to get the most out of today, I would really encourage you to just shut everything down for the next hour and really be here with us today. And then I would recommend using Chrome if you're not already. Our product works better with it. So I just wanted to go over the Cmx Community Values. So our 3 values are to be generous, to be groundbreaking, and to be actively inclusive. Our goals for today, also very simple. Number 1 is to connect. You're going to have an opportunity to jump into some interactive breakout rooms in today's session, and also chat in the chat here. And we really hope that you're going to have the opportunity to meet some really awesome community professionals that are here with you today. With the Cmx Masterclass especially, we're hoping that you're going to get at least one actionable thing that you can implement today and really learn from this experience. And the overarching goal with Cmx Masterclass and all of our programming is to advocate and to grow the community industry. And I just want to give a shout out to everybody that's here today. You're really at the forefront of building this industry and helping the community industry grow. So thank you to all of you for doing everything that you do and for being here today to continue your learning and to get better as a community professional. So if you haven't done so yet, we just want to do a quick icebreaker in the chat. So please pop in your company and role, your favorite emoji, and what you had for breakfast. I see a lot of them are coming through already. I think we all agree that coffee is definitely a must, and I can see that as a form of self-care as well. So while you do that, I'll do a quick introduction to Bevy. So for those of you that are experiencing Bevy for the first time, right now you're in our conference platform. And at Bevy, we truly believe in the rise of community-led events. We believe that community is the new competitive moat for modern brands. We believe that events are the best way to generate community. We really believe that events shouldn't be just a once-a-year thing, but it should be a year-round thing. And that the highest quality events aren't run by the brand, but they're run by the community. So Bevy is the tool that helps you make that happen. And welcome to the future of events. So with that, I am super excited to introduce our amazing speaker for the day. Her name is Ashley Collins, and she's a product manager here at Bevy, focusing on analytics. So Ashley, I'll bring you up on stage, and please tell us a little bit more about yourself, and then we'll get right into the workshop.
Perfect. Thank you for the warm introduction, Marcia. My name is Ashley Collins. I am based out of Chicago, and I have been at Bevvy for about 14 months. I will go ahead and bring up my screen. Just give me a minute. Perfect. So I've been at Bevvy for about 14 months, and I focus on analytics and integration. So anything data, whether it is coming into Bevvy or leaving Bevvy, or just telling a really strong narrative story around data, that's what I focus on day in and day out. So just going through what we'll talk through in the next 40 minutes or so, we'll do an opening breakout session. We'll talk about the Northstar framework. We'll explore some input metrics. We will explore Northstar metrics, and then we'll leave some time for Q&A and closing remarks. So I'm super excited today that we'll be an interactive whiteboarding masterclass. So it won't just be me being a talking head, but you will be able to interact with each other in multiple modalities. So we'll use the Figma whiteboard, which you see here on your screen. We'll be using breakout sessions. We'll be using chat and everything in between there. So this is a quick gift. Marcia, if you wouldn't mind going ahead and dropping the link to access this whiteboard for all the attendees. Go ahead and click on that link and enter your name. And then when we go into the breakout sessions and a couple other parts throughout the master class, you'll go ahead, you'll click on that square. You can change the color if you want it to be a different color. And then you can type in your content there for the respective section portion of the program. So with that, we will go into our first breakout session. And during this time, I would like each of you all to focus on how would your role as a community manager change if you could confidently illustrate ROI to the business. So we'll do a small breakout session. There'll be 3 people in each room. It'll be approximately 5 minutes in length. And then go ahead and add one or many stickies about how your role as a community manager would change. So Marcia, if you wouldn't mind sending us into breakout rooms, we'll see everybody in a little bit. For those of you that are in the general session, we are just doing a breakout room where we are using the interactive whiteboard and we are answering the prompt of how would your role as a community manager change if you could confidently illustrate ROI to the business. So there is a link in chat to access the whiteboard, and you can go ahead and add a sticky or 2. For those of you that are still in the general session, I just switched over to our whiteboard and we see that people are adding sticky notes on how their role would change if they could confidently illustrate ROI to the business. Looks like a couple people are having a tough time. So I'll just add some sticky notes for people to populate. All right. So we have a couple minutes left in this breakout session, but those that are in the general session here, if you can hear me, you are welcome to participate in this activity. Just go ahead and grab a Post-it note from here, drag it up from your toolbar, and then you can go ahead and type in your content. And the question we are looking to answer and discuss is, how would your role as a community manager change if you could confidently illustrate ROI? So I'll give you a couple minutes to do that. So it looks like giving the team confidence. All right. Looks like a couple are starting to trickle back into this general session room. We are just in a breakout right now. We are using the Figma board. The link is in the chat, but we are answering the question of, if you could confidently illustrate ROI of your community to your business, how would your role as a community manager change? So there are a couple Post-it notes there. If you go ahead and double click on it, you can just go ahead and add your content. All right. All right, everybody's starting to make their way back in. Just drop us down. Let me just move this one over here. All right, it looks like people are returning from their breakout rooms. So hopefully during that time, you were able to meet a new connection. You're able to have a little bit of discussion about how your role would change as a community manager. I did see that there was a little bit of trouble adding sticky notes, so I'll go through and do a quick live demo there. Right down here, you should have a toolbar. When you click on the sticky note in your toolbar, you can just go ahead and drag it up. Once you drag it up, you can just double click in there, and then you should be able to type in your content. So if you weren't able to do it during your breakout session, feel free to go ahead and grab one of those open sticky notes there. But let's just kind of zoom in on a little bit of these, and let's see what came to mind? So a community manager would love to have the team ownership about the community and not being a solo player. So that was one thing that came to mind. Giving the team confidence and direction, would prioritize strategies. It'd be really cool if we could combine retargeting the market funnel and the community funnel. Let's see what else. Metrics could help us improve and impact and make a strong case for more resources to expand our team. So I think, moderating on the fly here, I think what's kind of coming through is if you could, as a community manager, if you could effectively communicate, the ROI that you're delivering to the business, you would be able to advocate for resources. You'd be able to more targeted. It would help boost team morale. So I'm really excited here today to be able to walk through this masterclass with each of you in the sense of, what are some tools and frameworks that we can help bridge this gap for you all. So with that, I'm going to encourage us all to think about measurement a little bit differently. And some of the benefits that you'll gain from thinking about it differently is it'll provide a greater understanding of the business impact. It's an instrument for managing your community in a less reactive way, and it will empower you as a community manager to become data-led. So I think in the benefit of, when we think about reporting, it's either like, oh my goodness, it's the end of the month, end of quarter, like I have to go through and gather all of this content and surface it up in some type of slides to my stakeholders. But what can be really transformative about a measurement strategy is it's a tool that also helps you be a stronger community professional. So it helps you validate and build confidence that you are driving impact to the business, that it is a way for you to monitor, is your community strategy that you sought out and implemented, is it delivering the fruit of your labor? And then it empowers you to be data-led. So we recognize that numbers can be a pro or a con, but how do we help instill confidence that you are reporting out on the metrics that make sense? So as we're thinking about measurement, think about how this can help you be a stronger community manager and advocate for your function in the business. So with that, I'll break into part one, which is really talking about the Northstar framework. And so the goal of any measurement framework is just to improve the way in which you manage and build your community measurement process. I am a product manager, and so by default, I gravitate towards the Northstar framework. While it is very product management centric, it's also very applicable to community management because it helps break down the process of understanding metrics that can help validate your community strategy. So I want to call out a really helpful resource that was written by Amplitude, and it's called the Northstar Playbook. It's available online as a download, and that's really kind of what I've structured today's presentation around because it does a really fantastic job of breaking down how to create a measurement tool for your organization. So really, what does the Northstar metric framework break down into? It's 3 parts. So it focuses on your input metrics, your Northstar metric, and your mid and long-term business results. And then it looks at the dimension of time. So what are some leading metrics, your input metrics that you can focus on, and what are lagging metrics? And so the next course of, the next 25 minutes, we will walk through how to populate this. So you'll also walk away with this worksheet as well. I'll drop the link into chat during Q&A. But this is a great way to start thinking about and organizing your thoughts in terms of I've got a bunch of metrics that I measure. How do I bring these into a framework or into a way that is digestible and can be applicable and implemented? So you can focus on metrics that help you understand the breadth, how many people are engaging in your community. You can focus on metrics that are on the depth, how frequently are people coming back? You could look at frequency, or there's some other type metrics here. But I won't go through this in detail, but we'll break this down for you. So a couple different examples. I'm an example-led person of where it's helpful to see things, but Spotify uses this. So, they've listed their input metrics on the left-hand side. They focus on trial users or subscriptions. Those metrics all roll up and feed into their Northstar metric. The time spent listening to and you can see how that metric feeds into, their mid and long-term business impacts, which is monthly subscriptions for premium users. Another example of an organization that uses this is OpenTable. OpenTable is a software that is used to book reservations online. And so with this, with identifying their input metrics, they were able to identify the Northstar metric, which is the number of seated covers per month. This is how they indicate that their product is healthy and being adopted by customers and by users. And then we can see how that feeds into their mid and long-term impacts. Last example is Netflix. I'm sure we have all binged on this, unfortunately, during the last 2 years. But, again, another popular organization that is leveraging this framework to help understand and measure their work in a way that clearly illustrates ROI to the business and to the goals. So they focus on time spent watching and streaming content. So there's just a few applicable examples here. We'll come back to them. But let's get back into the meat of it. So part 2 is your input metrics. What is the exact goal of these metrics? So it's to select a small set of metrics that you believe you can influence your community offerings and that will most directly affect that Northstar metric. So I really want to call out the small set of metrics. We're not trying to boil the ocean here, but what are the handful of things that will help you understand if your community strategy is yielding the desired results through these metrics and how you track them. So with that, this is the left-hand side of that framework we were talking about, and these are your leading indicators. So going back to those examples. So these calling out for Spotify, these are very targeted metrics that they're tracking. So the number of premium trial users, the number of subscriptions. OpenTable focuses on retention rate, or the percent of active users that are on their mobile app. For example, looking at Netflix, the number of hours watched per sessions, or the number of sessions per week. So you can see how all, depending on their strategy that they're going after, these metrics can help inform, am I performing, or am I help moving, the needle up and to the right? So a quick checklist in terms of, what makes a good input metric as you're thinking through this for your community. So they can be calculated quickly. As you think about those examples I just saw, they were just counts or they were averages. It wasn't some complex calculation. They're easy to measure and easy to remember. So taking that a little bit further, the metric has a clear name and definition. It's framed in plain language so that all partners can understand and all stakeholders can understand. An example that I ran into this week as I was working on a data request for the business was, we want to know the number of events that took place. And yes, that seems like a straightforward answer, but are we talking about the number of events that were completed, or the number of events that are upcoming, or the number of events that are currently live? So as you're going through and thinking about each of these, what your input metrics are, make sure that it is a clear measure, has a clear, and also a supporting clear definition. Because at the end of the day, you may not always be there to explain this metric and what it means. You should pick your influence or your input metrics to be something you can influence through your community. So something that you have direct impact. So going back to that example of the number of events, you as a community manager, if you're doing a community-led event programming, this is something you can directly influence. Your input metrics would be influential and complementary factors that you believe most directly affect your Northstar metrics. So remember how we talked about this small collection of metrics rolls in and supports your Northstar metric. These are, again, your leading indicators. So you're going to rely on these input metrics to understand how things are performing within your community in a small segment of time. So with that, we are going to head out into our second breakout session. And during this time, I would like you to add a sticky note for for your input metrics. So what are the metrics that you include in your monthly reporting? So this will be, again, three people per group. We'll spend about 5 minutes doing this, and then we'll add a sticky note for each metric that you want to track. So we'll be moving over into this yellow section here. And just a quick reminder, to add a sticky note, you'll go to your toolbar, you'll drag it up, and then you'll type your content in. So Marcia, if you wouldn't mind sending us into breakout rooms, we'll see you all in about 5 minutes time. All right, and for those of you that are still in the general session, you are welcome to participate. If you just want to go ahead and add metrics that you track, go ahead and click here and then drag up a square and you can type in a metric. We have about a 3-minute warning, and looks like people are starting to add in their metrics. All right. See, a couple people are coming back into the general session. We are just doing an interactive whiteboarding session in breakout rooms. So what you're looking at now is the Figma board, where we're doing interactive and we're listing out the metrics that we measure on a monthly basis. So I'm going to switch back over here. Let's take a look at what people are mentioning. Move a couple of these empty ones off to the side. All right. I think we have 1 more minute left, and those that are in breakout rooms will start trickling back in, but we'll take a look at the metrics that are here. All right, people are beginning to route back in from their breakout rooms. See lots of activity on the Figma board, which is great. If you're just coming back, would love to see reactions in the chat. How do you feel about this type of interaction during a webinar? How is whiteboarding? Pros, cons, anything you would change? I know, so little time. Venia, I think that's how you say it, Logan. No, it's tough to measure out to figure out and identify the metrics that you want to track. So let's do a quick readout here on the board, but it looks like we've got some around the number of members, number of event registrations, number of event attendees, sentiment of the sentiment, number of groups, engagement. Tiff, how do you, if you wouldn't mind putting in the chat, how do you measure engagement for your community? Is there different levels of engagement? Would love to learn a little bit about that. Let's see, we've got a little bit around RSVPs and attendees, unique website visitors. So what's really interesting here is it's a real big cross section of, let's see, I love that I got some people helping me organize too. We can make these be a little bit more. There we go. But what I like about this activity is it also helps think about metrics a little bit differently. Maybe there are some that you don't track that would make sense to you today. But also something that's here that's interesting as well as these can be input metrics that you aspire to track one day. You don't have to have the tooling in place to do it yet, but you can always work towards it and you can evolve depending on what that Northstar metric is for you. Looks like there's some around articles published. We've got some new member activity, Twitter engagement. So what's interesting here is we have a lot around engagement. We have some around frequency. Talk about breadth of interactions. So it'd be really interesting here as well. If in the chat too, I think about this when we think about CMX, we think about the spaces model and the type of community that you have. So whether you have a support community, an acquisition community, a product-led community. So if you wouldn't mind dropping in the chat what type of community you have, that would be super helpful, because I think each of these metrics as well play into what input metrics matter most depending on your community strategy. So for example, taking a little bit further, if I'm a support-led community, number of article clicks on help desk articles might be really important for me to track, because that means people are looking at the articles that we are providing to learn how to use our content or something along those lines. If you are a product-led community, for example, maybe you want to track the number of interactions on feature requests or likes or commentary there. So it's really interesting just to have that as another data point to cross-reference against. So thank you so much for all going through and doing this. I will zip back over to slides. But a couple things to remember about your input metrics. They should be actionable factors that in combination contribute to your Northstar metric. So each of those metrics that you listed on your Post-it note, take a moment to think about, is this something that I could influence with my community strategy? If you are relying on perhaps your marketing team to do all the marketing promotions, is that something truly you as a community manager can own and control to illustrate the ROI of your community? So maybe that's not the right input metric to communicate the value and the ROI out. So I think about that and truly of can you own the success of this community and the things that you contribute to the business? So I'm just going to walk through a couple meaningful community metrics. So like I mentioned, I am a product manager here at Bevvy. We do have analytics in product. This is, just some of those input metrics that we focus on. And so we have a concept called chapters or groups, depending on how your community is structured. But perhaps you listed, you want to know how many new groups formed this year. How many total groups or chapters do you have? And how many active chapters do you have? Maybe you want to view the chapter growth over time, or new chapter growth in a specific quarter, or the number of chapters that are active in a specific quarter. So these are all just a few examples of input metrics at the chapter or group level. Another example is around, the members, the site members or the site users that are engaging. So this is looking at the number of people that have a profile within the Bevvy community. So perhaps you want to measure the number of site users year to date, or the total number of users, or those that are engaged. For us, engaged means they've attended at least one event in the past year. Perhaps you're going to measure that over time, by quarter, and you might want to see the breakdown of your engaged users over quarter. So these are all input metrics that are really helpful, but then you can take it one step further to your partners around the business. So let's say if you have, focusing on this metric here, site user growth year to date, this could be really powerful for your marketing team and saying, hey, you know what, our community-led program brought in this number of new accounts. Can we cross-reference this about how many of these people are already on our mailing list? So that, again, begins to shift the conversation there. We can look at, going back, engaged site users. Maybe there are people that are highly engaged and we want to market to them a little bit differently. This is another segment of people that you can provide to your marketing team, or perhaps to sales, and be like, hey, they are incredibly engaged. Let's look at them a little bit differently. Last example, looking around community members. If you're a community led program, it might be important to measure the number of chapter leaders that you have, chapter teams. So you want to track year over growth. So maybe like this year, it's really great that we have 5 new chapter leaders that are coming in that have stepped up. You can get to this by understanding if people are really engaged at the event level, how do you graduate them up to being a leader of a chapter of a group? You can measure, the total team memberships or unique chapter memberships. So, this is just a handful of some of those input metrics, but I selected these because these are all metrics that are meaningful. And as a community manager, you really have full control over in terms of how they can perform, and you can control the levers of, how people are engaging with your community. So I think the last thing here is, linking those input metrics to your community. So the events and activities that you extend to your community members should influence your input metrics. So think about your event programming strategy or the content strategy that you have. Are you doing virtual or in person or maybe hybrid? Think about all those different touch points and how those can help influence those input metrics that you've come after and you've identified. So with that, we'll transition into the third part, which is identifying the really tricky one, which is your Northstar metric. This is this middle portion of the framework. So it's not a leading indicator, but it takes time to recognize, how is your community performing and how is it delivering ROI to your business. And so the goal of a Northstar metric is to select that one metric that best shows the value of your community to your business. So imagine if there was only one metric that you could show in a board slide deck to illustrate the value of your community work. What would that metric be? That's what we're talking about, like the big shebang. Like they don't want to see all the roll up all your input metrics. Like this is the one thing that they'll focus on and say, like, yes, we need to invest in community. So a couple examples going back to those companies I previously mentioned. Spotify, their Northstar metric is the time spent listening to music by subscribers. It's clear, we understand that if this is something that's increasing, that then people are spending time in the product. OpenTable focuses on the number of seated covers per month. Netflix focuses on the time spent watching streaming content. So, there's a lot going on here in the sense of it's clear how this Northstar metric can illustrate value to the business. So like I mentioned, Northstar metrics are really tricky to develop, and they might evolve. It might be your Northstar metric for 12 months time, 18 months of time, and it's okay for it to change. But as you're going through and thinking about it, it expresses value. We can see why it matters. So pick a metric. Your Northstar metric should show, why does community matter? So for example, let's say if you are a support community and maybe the Northstar metric that you can show is the reduction in support tickets or something along those lines, or support costs. So that would be your Northstar metric. And then you could have your roll-up metrics going into it. It should represent vision and strategy. So the companies and the community's business strategy are reflected in it. So if going back to that support example, if you are helping customers adopt your product, then we should be able to see that they are adopting it and they're being able to be unblocked by the content that is in that community. But also from a business perspective, perhaps your cost of support engineers or customer support representatives is dropping, or the ticket count is dropping. It's a leading indicator of success. So it predicts the future rather than reflecting on the past results. So, it indicates somewhere of like where you want to go to illustrate growth. It's actionable. Again, going back to empowering community managers, how can we take action to influence? It's understandable. It's framed in plain language and non-technical partners or your stakeholders around the business can understand. So going back, thinking about those examples I showed, like, time spent watching content. That's very clear. Or time spent listening to music. It's very clear. It's measurable. You have the instrumentation to track it. So it doesn't have to be the instrumentation have to be present today, but it should be trackable. And it's not a vanity metric. So when it changes, you can be confident that the change is meaningful and valuable and that your strategy is working rather than something that doesn't predict long-term success. So with that, we'll do one more jam session. I know we're coming up for time, but this will just be an independent one. But do you have a Northstar metric? And so we'll just take a couple minutes. If you want to go over to the Figma board one last time, we'll be focusing on this quadrant here. Jam number 3. What is that one metric that you would use to communicate to stakeholders around the business that your community is driving value? So we'll spend 1 minute here as people add their content. All right. Support deflection, increased community, number of cases, graduates hired, time spent on platform. All right. So some good stuff coming in here. Just to leave time for Q&A, I am going to keep going, but feel free to keep working on that section of the Jam board as well. So while you're thinking about and populating that sticky note, selecting the right Northstar metric can shift the conversation for you as a community manager from cost center to growth center for the business. And so really that's what I'm trying to do as a product manager and to empower specifically an analytics product manager and the data team that I work with. How do we help illustrate the ROI and value that these community programs are driving for the business? And so with that, I will open it up for Q&A.
All right, I'm going to pop back on for the Q&A as well. Ashley, that was awesome, and thank you so much to everybody for participating and adding your thoughts to the Jam board. It's very cool to see. So yeah, I see we have a few questions that folks have added already, and if you haven't added yours yet, please add it to the Q&A tab so that I can easily find it. Okay, so before that, a few of you have asked if you'll have access to the presentation and the recording. Yes, both are going to be sent out. But let's jump into the questions. So I see the first one here from Sarah. How do we turn the desired member outcome into a metric? For example, my community is a learning community. So what matters if the members are feeling more confident with the skill, but that's hard to track quantitatively?
Yeah, so I think an approach that I would take to getting here is, if you're a learning community, what are the actions that they need to do to what do they need to learn to be proficient? So, what are those specific things that you're trying to do? So maybe, and I'm looking out my window right now, like maybe it's figuring out like how to connect a fire hose to a fire hydrant, like what do they need to know to be confident there, for example. And then maybe you could add some sentiment at the end of if they're reading, documentation on it, maybe you could add a button at the bottom of like, after reading this documentation, I feel that I could successfully connect a fire hose to a fire hydrant. And that's a way in which you could incrementally track it. So I wouldn't track it on every item, but maybe what are those key things that illustrate proficiency?
Perfect. Great question here from Carla. For a support community whose Northstar metric is support or deflection and ticket reduction, how can we correlate community metrics with tickets logged to support? What are some key metrics we can use?
Yeah. So I think something that is interesting is number of tickets can be a pro or a con. If they're submitting a lot of tickets, if they're, for example, bug tickets or anything along those lines. Actually, you know what? Let me think of a different, more simple example. So let's say I have gone through and submitted a bunch of tickets in terms of I couldn't figure out how to do X, Y, or Z. And then you worked with a product manager or someone enablement success, and then you implemented perhaps like an in-app guidance tool like Pendo. You added tooltips or a walkthrough, then you could track, the number since the implementation of this walkthrough in the product to complete this, has the number of tickets decreased? So that's one way in which you could track it. Another way in which you could do it is, maybe you could look at page views for the article, for example. So maybe like there is an article where people just cannot figure out how to set up tickets for an event or something along those lines. And so maybe you work with product and say, hey, we're seeing a lot of volume on this specific article type. Is there something we could do in product to enhance this user experience? And then you could track, like, is the number of views dropping over a period of time? So that's just a couple different examples there. Hopefully that helps.
That's awesome. Question from Tiana. What tools do you recommend to keep track of your community members and engagement?
Ooh, that's a juicy one. By default, I'm going to say Bevvy is a great one for tracking community members. But I think, in all honesty, community members there's a lot of different layers there. So there are your community members and like people that just have accounts in your community. There are those people that are attending events. There are those people that are leading chapters. So there's a lot of different members in terms of like what you actually want to track and which segment of people are really important to you. In terms of tracking engagement, I would maybe look at it a couple different lenses. So I look at it in event engagement. Like, are they coming? Are they RSVPing? Are they actually attending? Are they checking in for the event? And then if it's a virtual event, how long are they staying? One thing that's really cool that we can do is, oftentimes we work really hard to put together a multi-day series or a multi-day conference. And then we have all these sessions. We don't know, which one performed the best, And so with Bevvy specifically, we have functionality to see like how long people spent in each session and like what was the average engagement time. So now as you're going back and you're plating your content, hopefully mine has a really high engagement score. Like we can see that people will stay the long time. There's a lot of engagement there. So I would say that's one way in which you could look at it too.
Awesome. And then question here from Christine. She's wondering if you could elaborate on the vanity metrics.
Yeah. I think when we think about a metric, it should be something that is a little bit that it's a reach goal, really. Like I think you should select a metric that you need to actively work towards versus selecting a metric that has already been achieved or falsely represents the success of community. So I would probably focus it on there. I'm thinking about here's like a more example where perhaps you pick a metric that's like the number of clicks on something like that. Well, clicks is obviously going to be really high, but what you really care about is the number of people that clicked that link and completed the action after clicking that. So an example of a vanity metric would be the clicks because it would be really high, but you really care about the number of people that completed the action, which was like completing the registration or completing the purchase. Hopefully that helps.
Awesome. Question from Amanda. Can you provide any additional community level specific versus company level examples for Northstar metrics?
Yeah. So I think if you are I guess I'll like maybe go back to support because that's the most tangible one. But I think if you are a support-led community and you want to illustrate the value, you could look at, the time spent on tickets, for example. So let's say if your support team is tracking the cycle time that it takes to close out a ticket, there's dollars associated with that. But if you have a support-led community and people are helping each other, then that support time you're not actually paying for. And so that's an example of there's a reduction in time spent reducing customer tickets because they're able to solve through it. If you're looking at like an acquisition type community, you could look at, the number of active people within a certain accounts or something like that. So we strive to have, at least 5 people, like 5 actively engaged people from every brand or something along those lines, or recognizing brand ambassadors. So I can certainly follow up with some more poignant examples. I'm trying to think on the fly.
For sure. Yeah. You know what? I think a lot of the questions kind of touch upon the spaces model. So for those of you that are listening here today, definitely search up Cmx spaces model. It goes through various types of communities and the different ways to measure them. So I'd really recommend checking out that resource. But yeah, let's keep going with the questions here. We have so many good ones. So there's one from Christina here, and it says, I feel like it's a bit difficult to navigate in between community strategy and auto determination in business strategy. How can we balance quality and quantity when we have a high growth objective? So for example, a dev product adoption community.
Ooh,
that's a meaty one.
That's a meaty one. What? Do you mind if we come back to that one? I just want to give it a little bit more thought. Okay.
No problem. Yeah, okay. And I'll leave it there in the Q&A. You can also read it. Okay. So let's see. Question from Tyler. How would we determine the type of community we want to develop? Learning versus product-led, etc. So I think that's another one, like spaces model would be super helpful. But Ashley, is there any advice you want to share?
Yeah, I can bring it up here real fast. Let me actually make this a little bit bigger for you all. There you go. I think it goes through the objectives and, how you're reaching, how does your community support the other business units? So, is your community supporting your marketing and sales funnel? So then you might really want to focus on, acquisition. I think it starts with the why. Like, what are we trying to do with this group? Are you primarily focusing on contribution where you want people to add in content? Or are you focusing on engagement? So I think, there can be a mix of these. but there should be a primary, lead in terms of like why our community is present. If you think about, I'll think about like Looker's community, for example. Their community is really around contribution and support, because a lot of people will go there first, like, how did you solve this, or anything along those lines. So I think it starts also with recognizing your needs for your community, or what your customers or anything along those lines, what they're seeking out. And then where is there deficiency in the business that can't actually supply that? So hopefully that helps a little bit.
Awesome. Okay, so question from Mark. Our community has diverse goals. So what about 23 Northstar metric aligned to each goal? So I think the question is kind of like if the community has a bunch of goals, how do you sort of pick the Northstar metric to align with each one, or does it need to align with each goal?
Yeah, I guess I would challenge you to go back to prioritization in the sense of which is most important first, because I think naturally come to like spreading yourself too thin with your strategy. Like, it can't be a catch-all. So how do you work with the business to identify, we want to go after this quarter, or this for this year type thing? And that becomes the lead Northstar metric and the lead set of objectives that you're focused on driving. Because I think it's important to have a targeted strategy versus one that's kind of a catch-all, and then you don't get the growth or the rapid growth that you're looking for. So I guess, Mark, to summarize it, I would challenge to speak to your business stakeholders and say, if you had to prioritize these, what's most important, and what would you expect the outcome to be from each, if we focused on X, if we focused on Y?
Perfect. Okay, so I think I'll jump back to Christina's question, but let's simplify it. I think, when you leave the session and, you're reporting on your community, how do you sort of balance between, like the quantitative and qualitative pieces of it?
Yeah. I think quantitatively, I think I would push back to, those input metrics of what are the things I just need to track month over month, quarter over quarter. Qualitatively, I think I would look at how do those map into my strategy. So let's say, for example, I want to increase the geographic reach of my community. What would I need to do that? So perhaps you would then focus on increasing the number of chapter team leaders, spinning up new chapter groups, or going after increasing the number of members or site users in a specific region. So I think you kind of have to work from it in both routes. Hopefully that helps unblock a little bit there.
I think that's super helpful. Awesome. So I think we'll end there for the Q&A. Ashley, again, I just wanted to say a huge thank you for being here. I'm just going to share my screen as well for just a quick wrap up. So Ashley has volunteered her email here as well for any feedback or questions. Please feel free to get in touch with me as well if you have any general feedback about CMX Masterclass. There's also going to be a survey that's going to be sent out at the end of this. Please take a couple of minutes to fill that out. It's super helpful for us in planning future sessions like this. But again, just want to say a huge thank you to Ashley for being here with us today and for taking us through this interactive workshop. I know it was super valuable, and hopefully everybody enjoyed it. Thank you to all of you for being here today and being part of our community, and for participating and asking really great questions. So to end off on, I just want to make sure that everybody is aware of Cmx Summit. It's coming up really quickly. And this year, our theme is Thrive. This is going to be our biggest and our most global and the first fully hybrid Cmx Summit. So whether you choose to join us in person or virtually from anywhere in the world, we're so excited to see you in September. The summit is going to be 3 days of jam-packed workshops for the first day, and then the conference piece of it for the next 2 days. There's going to be some really incredible speakers. And what I'm really excited about is the networking piece of it. I'm just so excited to see everybody in person again. So I'll drop the link for it in chat. If you haven't registered yet, please do so. We're so excited to see you. Again, thank you so much to all of you for being here, and hopefully see you in September at Summit. Have a great rest of your Thursday, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.